Solutions. I appreciate you all taking the time out of your, I'm sure, very busy and hectic schedules to participate in the webinar today, Strategic Heart Fostering Sustainability Through Love of the Mission. This was something that we actually envisioned, and as we were putting the presentation together, using the word love in the workplace environment, we're like, oh boy, are people going to sign up for this? Are we going to scare people away? So we appreciate the interest. I know we had 20 people actually register for this webinar. So that's exciting, and hopefully we'll accomplish the objectives that were the reason you all decided to show up today. Why is it not? So very quickly, I do just want to explain a little bit about Strategy Solutions for those of you who may not be familiar with us. I know there were some familiar names on the registers list, but there were some that at least I didn't recognize, so many of you may be new to our organization.
Can I get that for you for tomorrow? Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know if I mute you, if you're going to be able to hear me. But the company itself is really dedicated to facilitating creative solutions to ensure the sustainability of public, private, and nonprofit organizations, with the end kind of sole mission of the company really being to create healthy communities. And for us, it's about making the systems, connections, as well as helping the individual organizations to become healthy. So if all of the different public, private, social service sectors are working together, then there's increased efficiency, better response to consumer needs. And if the individual organizations have all the appropriate capacities, the right structure, the right governance, then the organizations are healthy, which sort of feed back to the community. The hope of today is really to talk about the role of love for the mission and those that your individual organizations actually serve, and talk a little bit about outcomes and sustainability and how, if there's that intersection, you can have strong outcomes and move your organization to sustainability. We also want to talk about the elements of the strategic heart culture, which is really the intent behind the presentation, and how can you begin to foster your culture that way.
The conference has been muted. The conference has been unmuted.
So we really want to look at your board and individual staff members and how they tend to be interacting on a day-to-day basis. So are they infused with a relentless restlessness? So do they have that uncomfortable urge for constant innovation, driven by the nagging feeling that things are never quite good enough? Is management stuck? Is the board stuck, kind of focusing on, we've always done it this way, or this is reasonable and rational, it makes sense? So what's really driving the essence of the board and the staff? Are we looking at ways to stoke emotions and get everybody engaged and passionate about what's going on? Are people coming up with new innovative ideas and bringing that depth and breadth and kind of vigor into everything that they're doing? Or is it just the same old mundane, kind of go through the motions and don't really allow the emotion or sort of those what-if questions? And, what would we be doing if we really cared about one another, the board members, the people we served, and letting that drive us. It's also about, kind of how do we get out of this, what's manageable and what's not manageable, and look at the principles and draw on common sense, but also collectively rally around the bigger vision, knowing that if we've got multiple people supporting the same direction, it's going to be a stronger outcome. We have several of our clients that refer to it as we're all rowing in the same direction. And when you show up, oftentimes there's such disconcerted energy that it seems like half of you are trying to move forward while the other half are rowing the boat backwards. And how do you really get that synergy and have everyone driving in the same ultimate direction towards the same goal? So looking at this idea of a strategic heart culture, it's really about challenging your assumptions as individuals, challenging the assumptions that are institutionalized? How do you create that shared vision and come up with those core values and the ultimate cause that drives everything that you do? Doing and expecting this idea of completed staff work from everyone that's involved. And then how do you build innovation and that expectation that there's a return on investment? How can we couple that in individuals' performance expectations? How do we get a dedicated team rallied around some of this new stuff while we're keeping the day-to-day business operations happening also? So one of the things that often happens is people get to the stuck place, and it's really kind of the feeling of we're having the same conversation over and over and over again, and nothing's really ever getting accomplished. Mm-hmm. And one of the best ways around that is to really step out of the content and start to observe the process. It's almost let's do a timeout and stop looking at what we're talking about. So if we're trying to develop a new program, let's stop talking about the program itself and let's look at how we're actually interacting and treating one another. Many times, especially the individual who might have come up with the idea, can get in a position that they're trying to push that idea or that agenda. It's about winning or someone being right. Oftentimes in large groups you have people who may become disengaged because they feel like the process isn't evolving or the conversation tends to be stuck and it's redundant. So how can we stop and almost do a timeout during meetings or while we're having conversations and look at some of this, how we're actually treating one another? And we've tried very hard to commit to acting and thinking through this strategic heart culture and the principles at our organization. And we will get to the point in staff meetings, one of us will literally call a timeout and go, hey, let's look at this. We've got people backing away from the table. We have people raising their voice and it seems like we're yelling. We have to stop this. We're never going to accomplish anything. Let's address what's going on and what we're seeing from a body language perspective. Fix that, apologize if we need to, clarify misunderstandings, and now let's re-engage once we have worked past that emotion and got it out on the table. It's really about treating everything like a relationship and the way that you would interact with the people that you care about in your own family. What's interesting about human behavior is we tend to judge others by their behavior itself, what we actually see. But when it comes to us, we always judge ourselves based on our intention. So from our perspective, everything we do, well, it was in the best interest of that individual, or it's going to help the company in the long run. We disregard the behavior, however nasty it might be, that led us here. So we have to pay the same respect to others and look at their intentions and trust that when they bring up ideas or they do become passionate and emotional about something, that it has a good reason behind it, that they're not just being difficult to be difficult, that truly they have the best intentions of the people we serve and all of us at heart. One of the things that often happens in a conversation that we may not even be paying attention to, going back to the need to step out of the content and look at the process, many times during conversations, individuals resort to these forms of either silence or violence. And violence isn't necessarily the physical violence like you might think, but we can attack others' ideas and their feelings. How many times are you in a conversation and all of a sudden people start to withdraw? Maybe they lose eye contact. Maybe they physically put themselves away. We've showed up in organizations, and one in particular, that there were two members of management who, for whatever reason, didn't tend to agree on most of the day-to-day operations and the things happening in the organization. And the way their office was laid out, it was an old house, so it had a sort of two staircases, almost like if you would envision an old servant staircase and then a master staircase in an old house. They got to the point that they would actually turn around and take one of the other staircases just to avoid running into each other. So we have to address things like that when we see them. We also need to look for in conversations people who are trying to control them, or maybe they're attacking. How many times does everyone generically create labels? Well, that was management's decision, or those engineers over there think that way, or the doctors feel this way. It's the nurse, and you sort of start to label decisions and things that are happening and almost cluster them into individual categories. So when that happens, how can we stop, figure out what it is that we're doing, and address those situations with one another? And it really comes back to making the conversation and the environment safe for one another. So how can we let the other person, or everyone if we've got a group of people, know that it really is about their best interests and helping advance their goals or the mutual goals? How can we let them know that we care about them as individuals? And what's always interesting is you have the people in the crowd who typically go, well, what? Yeah, I don't like everybody. How can I do this? Even if you don't like an individual, at the end of the day, everybody can agree that as human beings, you deserve some level of mutual respect. Even if ultimately your ideas, you're always going to agree to disagree. But how can you put aside your own feelings about this individual and advance for the greater good? If you're in a situation where you've done something, or maybe your emotions got the best of you and you yelled or you said something that maybe you didn't mean, it really can be as simple as apologizing. That's what we would do if we were having a fight with our significant other or a family member. We apologize when we do something wrong. Yet in a work environment, it's so hard for people to do that. And it's okay to revisit a conversation that's already happened. Many times things get heated, somebody walks away, you don't want to revisit it, you just want to move on. But really it's important to create that closure, come back, apologize. Clarify. If in the heat of the moment you called somebody lazy, go back and apologize. I didn't mean to call you lazy, but I really feel like when we're doing these projects that, you tend to not meet the deadlines, you're not as responsive as some of the other team members. So call out the observable actions that you see the other person doing and try to take away and depersonalize that label. What also is really helpful is coming back together and making sure that you do have mutual goals and shared interests, so you really are working together as a group or as a small pairing to advance something that you can both rally around. One of the things that tends to happen as individuals is we jump up the ladder of inference. We let things that maybe we see or observe or things we know about the past drive our view of an individual. And those situations stick in our mind, and we tend to bring them back up every time something happens. It's almost like this internal grudge that we have, although it's not a grudge. It's just sort of this thing we can't get past and let go of. So how do we get around that? And the problem is that oftentimes what happens when we jump up the ladder of inference is we create this story, right or wrong, but our emotions create these stories. So we see something here, observe, experience, and then based on what we just saw or heard, we tell ourselves a story about what we actually saw. Based on that, we create a feeling, and then we act. So all of this could be grounded in things that are not even true. They can be based on these past impressions and mental models we have of individuals. So we need to get to the point that we change our story, or we don't tell it at all. And the concept of the stories actually comes out of Crucial Conversations for anyone who's ever had the chance to participate in that. But the ability to control your stories is so powerful in both your personal and professional lives. Just the ability to go, I really don't know anything other than this person didn't call me back or they were late. I can't assume that they're ignoring me, blowing me off, doing something different. And when you free yourself from that and are open to it, it's so powerful for the relationships that you can have. And typically, when we develop these stories in our mind, they break up into these three categories. So oftentimes we become the victim. That it was not my fault. I was just an innocent bystander. I had no role in this. This was just something that happened around me or happened to me. I didn't do anything to cause this. I wasn't involved. Maybe we point the blame. It's all your fault. Somebody else is making me out to be bad. They have it out for me. They're trying to take my job. They want to make me suffer. And the other story is really this helpless, woe is me. If there was nothing else I could do, so I had no other option but to do this unhealthy action. The way I always think of the helpless story is, ever run late for a meeting and you are frantically hitting the closed door button on the elevator despite the fact that there's someone coming who may be carrying something really heavy. So for you, you get in the elevator. Well, there was nothing I could do. I was late. I needed to get there. I had to show up on time. So you rationalize away the fact that you sort of closed the door on this person who was waiting for you. So what you need to do is change these stories in your mind to be able to improve your relationship and really get at a stronger connection with each other and help advance these goals. So we need to rethink the conclusions that we drew from the judgments that you made. We have to look at a story in a different way. We need to figure out what our role in the problem actually was. We need to humanize the other individual, and we need to get out of this helpless woe is me and turn ourselves into an able-bodied individual. And to do that, we need to say to ourselves, what am I pretending to not notice? Like, what role do I have in this? Was there something maybe I could have done? Did I do something that maybe I shouldn't have done? And really ask yourself these questions to get away from having no accountability in it. And sometimes it's difficult to really figure out what our role might be. It's hard to look at ourselves. And what I remember from a training on this that I attended, the instructor had several divorces, but so throughout the course of the training he kept referencing them and was talking about them, and his last one was very amicable. They actually went away on a vacation to settle and divide up assets. So it was challenging to figure out what in their relationship and their process did he or do wrong that led to this ultimate demise of the relationship. And at the end of the day, it was, I made the conscious choice to get married. So I put myself in this situation. So even if you have to unpack the role far enough to, I agreed to be on this work team, or I chose to take the job here, whatever it might be, all of your decisions led you to where you are today. So we all have some role in everything that happens. The other thing that we really need to do is think about and ask ourselves, well, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do this? This is a great way to humanize someone and take away something that maybe you perceive as backstabbing or them coming out and completely disregarding your ideas, because this is what you would want somebody else to do. We also need to look at other motives and look for good qualities and explore other options that might be out there. It's really about being mindful and not always judging people for the negative. It's trying to focus on the positive aspects of other individuals. And then we really need to acknowledge that in every situation, there's probably gray. Everything is not in either or. In most situations, there's something else that could be done. So if we miss the mark, how can we go back? What can we do and commit to in real time to help fix it and advance it? Think about what it is that you really want to achieve, and then start behaving in a way, and you'll actually start to align yourself and positive things will happen. We tend to refer to this as throwing things out in the universe, and just by the fact that you start to talk about them, or new ideas and opportunities start to present themselves. And really, relationships and everything come down to communication. So how can we get to a position with everyone that we're sharing what it is that we actually know? What are our facts? And then own our story. Let them know if we came to this crazy conclusion about their behavior and how that made us feel. And then work together to actually clarify what's going on. So if you take something as basic as an individual not meeting a deadline for a team collaborative project. So you can say, your conversation might sound something like, hey, Sue, you know what, we're working on this project. You knew I needed to have your part of the report done yesterday so I could add in ours. The fact that you didn't do that makes me think you don't care about this project. I'm feeling like you're lazy and maybe you're not as committed to this as you could be. I don't want to believe that that's your intentions, but help me understand. That gives the person the opportunity to first see how their behavior is being viewed and impacting the team, but it also lets them say, oh boy, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize me not getting that to you would have these consequences. I actually, ended up staying home yesterday. My son was sick. I had to take him to the doctor. We had to run around and pick up medicine. I just didn't get to it, and I really should have followed up with you. So it helps create a safe environment for the people to share their side of the conversation. It also gives you an outlet to let them know what it is that you're actually seeing and feeling about their situation and what you heard. So all of this really helps tie and feed into the collective culture of the organization, which is a set of beliefs which govern behavior. And when we look at an organizational culture, if people are not focused on creating a culture that they want, regardless there's an organizational culture, and oftentimes it's going to be the one that you don't want if you don't stay on top of the culture. The culture itself is made up of the values and beliefs the organization as a whole holds and aspires to. Oftentimes there's core values that agencies aspire to. That there's typically a mission. So all of that kind of drives the who we are. We tend to then build policies and practices to help support those. We also have relationships with one another. But then we have this observable behavior and things that you actually see. And many organizations get to the point that even though we could tell you our core values, your honesty, your respect, we value transparency and open and honest communication, teamwork, what people may be seeing can be completely different, or at least presenting a completely different message than that. And really it comes down to what is it that management actually values in terms of standards of behavior, but then how are we maintaining them? So if we value teamwork and collaboration, but all anyone sees are people disagreeing with ideas, nitpicking, people taking on projects because they feel they're better off doing them on their own, that's counterintuitive to the culture that we say that we actually want to create. So again, it really comes down to this idea of walking the talk, because the standards of behavior that people are going to believe in have nothing to do with what you might say they are or what you aspire as an organization to be. It's ultimately going to come down to the ones they see management and other kind of higher up officials demonstrating. So it has the opportunity to create this toxic life of its own. There's been organizations who don't even realize it. Their management team is so wed and ingrained in what they're doing. When you bring an outsider into the situation and call it out, it sort of becomes this overwhelming, we had no idea we were doing that. It's just the way that we've evolved and no one's challenged it or questioned it. So you need to ask yourself, where is the organization being focused? Are you spending a lot of time caught up in listening to people complain, saying things aren't fair, pointing fingers, or is the agency really focused on improving customer satisfaction? designing new innovative services that continue to benefit the client? Where is the leadership time being? Are you spending a lot of time on human resources and just trying to tend to all the day-to-day things that come up? Are people not doing their job, or at least not reporting what they're doing, so you're in a position where you feel like you have to micromanage? Or do you see leadership being able to be compassionate, showing respect and dignity for one another, kind of using appropriate manners, going back to the golden rule? What do you actually observe from an organizational perspective? And the problem is, if the majority of the time is being spent on the inappropriate kind of day-to-day office bickering, human resources things, then as a whole there's no time to advance the organization. People are typically not happy in those types of environments. So how can we recognize it, realize that something needs to be changed for the betterment of our staff? Because if we have unhappy people working for us, the work that they're doing and the people they are interacting with from a client or customer standpoint are also probably not as happy. And then you find yourself in a position where you could be losing clients because they're not feeling the positive, warm, embracing culture, because that's not what staff is seeing and feeling. So then they're passing that and projecting some of that negativity onto the people they're working with as well. It really comes down to leadership's ability to walk the talk and totally embody and embrace the core values of the organization. They also need to have zero tolerance for the inappropriate behavior. When things are going on and you have people who are constantly complaining, or maybe who are being outright rude and mean to one another, management's role is to stop that. Address it, figure out what it might be, and let the individuals know it will not be tolerated. We've had organizations that have had extensive zero tolerance lists that people have actually been let go because they can't figure out how to stop this, and maintaining their positive culture was so important to them. And this list was just taken from a couple of our clients who have zero tolerance policies. So things like dishonesty, always doing the pointing the finger they mentality, do you have people throwing tantrums, whining, and these may seem like trivial behavior, but if you have one person who's continuously showing up doing these, it really becomes toxic to the organization. Oftentimes people try to get others to rally around their thought also. So did you see so-and-so over there? I can't believe that they did that. And you try to sway other individuals to see your side. So when these things are going on and they're allowed to be tolerated, they have the potential to spread throughout the organization, which is just, like I said before, toxic. So really, just again, it comes down to leadership looking at the culture and taking ownership for it and creating this positive, warm environment that we want to see. So the idea of this webinar was really all about love and connecting and embracing emotions at work. So if that's something you truly value as a leader, you need to start to take actions to let others know that that's the type of culture that you want in your company, and that's what's really important to you moving forward, and then start to support that. So while culture and recognizing stories and our own mental models and emotional reactions to things are important, what else is really necessary to have a strong foundation in an organization is what we affectionately dub the completed staff work principle. And for us, having lived it for so long, it seems like almost a no-brainer. Like, why are people not doing this? And what we found is because it's so ingrained in us, we really can't assume that everybody knows it, because at the end of the day, these are skills that people need to be taught, and they need to understand what the expectation is. And it really comes down to taking overall ownership of an assignment. So that's great. I get it to do. I walk out of the meeting. I go back to my desk, and I start working on it. which is great. However, there are often underlying expectations or intended outcomes that the person who gave the assignment has that they may not have communicated. So it's really important as part of the completed staff work principle to be able to clarify all of those things up front and get at, how do you envision this end product being? Is it a full report? Is it a couple of slides in PowerPoint? Is it a consolidated executive summary that has maybe a supporting appendix document? But not knowing that up front lends yourself to be in a position where you develop an end deliverable product either back to an external consumer or an internal consumer that may not meet their expectations. It's also really helpful anytime something new is assigned to look at best practices and potential alternatives. Many things, life continues to evolve, so the way that something might have been done 2 years ago maybe isn't the way that is done now, or maybe that wasn't the best approach. So are there best practices or standards around this? Is there a different way of approaching this activity? Maybe we have ideas that we can recommend back to the group. And then during that time, how can we continue to manage customer expectations? And what this really starts with is this idea of owning a box. So I have a task, I have a job, I have an overall position that I'm expected to accomplish. And what does owning it really mean? It comes down to making sure whatever you produce at the end really meets the needs and expectations of everybody involved. So how can you go out and listen to other staff members? Maybe you need to listen to clients and consumers and then bring back a recommendation to the full team. So we've been doing work with a nonprofit organization. We've been acting as their sort of planning and quality department in the absence of them having a full-time staff. So we've had the fortune of showing up at their management team meetings that happen every week. And one of the things that they've started to do is bring up problems. And at first, when they brought up a problem, they were informed by the leadership that this wasn't the appropriate forum. So through a series of conversations, management team really is the appropriate forum to be having conversations and bringing up solutions. So the comment when they were told this wasn't the appropriate forum wasn't actually what was intended behind the statement, but all that anybody heard was, we're not supposed to bring up problems at this meeting and we have no other forum to do it. In engaging in conversations and calling the question, well, what do you actually mean by that? We're management. If we can't talk about it here, where do we talk about it? Gave the leader the opportunity to say, no, that's not at all what I meant. This absolutely is the place to be having these conversations, but I want all of you to take ownership of a problem before you bring it to me. So if you recognize something as a problem, talk to one another, talk to the other staff members, talk to the clients if you need to, figure out and really unpack the problem, then do some research and come back to the full team, present the problem, and offer recommended solutions. So don't just throw a problem in the middle of the room, but really do all of this additional legwork and due diligence, and then come back to us. The other thing that is really important during this process is to make sure that we're clarifying expectations. Again, it's really easy to just make an assumption that we know what the end product or the ultimate end expectation is, but maybe not. We've got this term that we have affectionately termed noodling, and this idea of throwing spaghetti against the wall. But what it is, it's really I walk out of the room, I think I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. I spend a little time starting to draft it. I get to the place that maybe I'm feeling stuck or I've spent, a couple hours on it. I just want to check in and make sure that this is actually meeting what my boss or whoever, the client, whoever's expecting it, wants. So you throw it back to them. and say, let me know what you think. This is where my starting point. Am I on the right direction? Am I on task here? Did I completely miss the mark? And it gives a chance in real time to evolve the product to make sure it's correct. The absence of doing that noodling puts you in a potential position, and anyone doing the task, where you spend all this time perfecting it and developing the perfect report or the perfect program and service, the perfect treatment plan, whatever it might be, on your own. And when you finally deliver it, you run the risk of someone saying, this isn't at all what I started. You need to start all over again. And then people become devastated because you feel like your end product wasn't valued, when in reality you just didn't meet the expectation, that you didn't take the time to make sure you understood. Also important to continue to look at best practices and research. What has been done before? What are things that maybe other organizations have been doing? This is where networking opportunities and different forums. I know there's leadership circles, the HR staff come together. So where are places you can show up and network with other people to see what maybe they're doing? Do you have a group you can send an email blast out to and get reactions? Are there articles or places that you can search to look for evidence-based approaches or best practice ideas? Can you, oftentimes when we have clients thinking about doing something new for them, we identify who might be considered a lead or who is doing something really cool and innovative related to that program, and then we pick their brains about what are the things that they learned, what were maybe challenges and barriers that they had to overcome while they were implementing this, and get the people who have been there share their content expertise and knowledge so we don't potentially repeat mistakes that we could, that could have been avoided, or little nuances that in a planning process maybe you can skip over or figure out ways to enhance as you go because you've taken the knowledge and you've learned from the people who have been there. How can you look at a cost-benefit analysis? How do you make sure that everyone's concerns are vetted during the process? So when you think about the solutions that you're going to have, it really comes down to doing your due diligence and making sure you have everything in place and documented, that you've listened to everyone who could potentially be impacted by this and given them an opportunity to weigh in. If it's something that has a cost associated to it, be it human capital or operating resources that might be required, have you thought through what those are likely to be, and can you quantify a return on investment? So when you make your recommendation back to the team, the client, your boss, whoever it might be, that you can lay everything out. Let them know that you've listened to the rest of the team, staff, clients, whoever it might be. This is what you really think is the best possible approach. It's going to require you, hiring an additional staff person, but in return it's going to, increase efficiency, or we'll be able to see more clients, which will help improve the bottom line. But what is it? So that when you make that recommendation, there really aren't questions or this sense that you just threw a dart on the wall and whatever stuck was the solution that you offered. And then, again, how do you just make sure that everything is communicated and things are up front? Oftentimes people walk away from a meeting knowing they have something to work on, but there's been no clarification about when it's actually due. The same leadership team that I referenced earlier had an opportunity to listen to the executive director share their expectations of the management team. And one of them was responsiveness and communication. Well, that's great. So we sat down and they all said, we need to know a little bit more. Let's actually set some milestones. So as a team, they committed to a 24-hour turnaround on email, a 48-hour turnaround on all phone messages, knowing that many of them worked out in the field and weren't always office-based or may not have work phones linked to cell phones where they have access to it all the time. But also for them, what was really important is if you and I are just talking and we agree that we're going to work on X, before we leave, let's decide when we need it to be due. And it's okay to say, that's not going to work for me, and here's all the reasons why. Let's renegotiate the due date. So you have to clarify when things are due and what expectations are, but also make sure people have the opportunity to comment on their feasibility to deliver on that. If for whatever reason a deadline is going to be missed, part of the completed staff work principle and just overall managing expectations is owning that and letting someone know. Again, this comes back to how should we really be treating one another. You would expect and you would want someone to let you know something wasn't going to be done on time. So share and pay that same common courtesy back and just let them know. I will tell you, we move everything around to meet deadlines. We have had people work 24 hours. We've had illnesses come up, and we've had to have new people rearrange childcare and figure out how to put themselves on a plane. But if for whatever reason we're not going to be able to meet a deadline, never once have we made a phone call and had someone get upset or frustrated because we couldn't do it. That simple fact of owning it and explaining why, people really do appreciate that. And the world isn't going to come to an end. So human nature, people will give you that common courtesy and understanding. So it is important to be able to communicate that. The last thing that we really want to talk about is this idea of innovation. And I'm not sure if any of you have read the book, How Stella Saved the Farm, but this was something that our president stumbled upon, and she may have actually stumbled upon it from her husband. But we all read it, and we were encouraging everyone that we worked with to read it. It's an interesting way to talk about innovation. And the book itself is a very quick read, and it actually uses a sheep and farm animals as throughout the story. So it's interesting as you read it, you start to equate individual people within your organization with all of them. But it does a nice job of painting the picture of how innovation needs to work. And in the book, Stella is actually a sheep, and she's got this idea of doing something with alpaca wool. So the organization itself thinks because they've already managed and produced sheep wool that they can just replicate it, get some alpacas, and the process will work exactly the same. So in the absence of realizing that this was going to need to be looked at differently, it wasn't working. The alpacas needed to eat different food. The entire way the wool needed to be processed was completely different. So they really needed to put dedicated people on the alpaca wool to keep the sheep part moving the way that it always has, but to also make sure that the alpaca wool was able to ultimately be successful. What many organizations do, just like the alpaca wool, they think they can just do something new, assign it, and keep plugging away. But it's really hard to take people who are busy in their day-to-day jobs and now have them focus on something else. The important things that come up in your day-to-day and keeping your core business going are always going to trump trying to start and do anything new. There's always going to be this barrier. So what really needs to happen is this idea of a dedicated team. How do you take individuals and let them focus their time solely on getting this new idea, this new product, this new service off the ground so that the other individuals can continue to do the core business of the business? And most people look at that or think about it and go, oh my gosh, it's not going to make money, it's just planning. How can we afford to hire someone to do this? Great question. Is there a way to look at shared staff? So can you take an individual or several individuals and maybe divide their time? So part of their time is still going towards a product or service that you're making money off of, but then the other half of their time is dedicated solely to this new thing. Or maybe you have existing people who a project is winding down, so you can scale back what they're currently working on so that they can focus on this idea of innovation. And here's just a cute little visual that talks about how it actually works. So the dedicated team, oftentimes it is suggested that maybe they should be somebody new. Because what's hard in organizations is you tend to get ingrained in what you do, or many people have been around for so long that you hear, oh, we tried that before, it didn't work. So you have to get past that mentality to really advance something. So you may need new outsiders. It's also really important to look at the skills and interests of the individuals. Just because somebody might be really good, like for going back to Stella, they might be really good at sheep wool, doesn't mean they have any interest in alpacas, or doesn't mean that they'll be good in that environment. So it's important to make sure that you have the right people on the team that match what you need them to be doing. It's also important that they have appropriate job descriptions and that everybody understands what their role is. The last thing you want to be in is a position where you create this us-them mentality because people view this dedicated team as getting additional resources, or maybe it seems like they're getting out of doing work because they're focusing their time on this new thing. They're no longer doing the day-to-day thing. So it needs to be very clear what their particular role is. The rest of the organization has to buy into their role and support it, and then the overall culture, like we talked about earlier, has to be wrapped around everything that you do. There also needs to be the appropriate support functions around this organization and this team. We've been working with recently an extension of a hospital system that actually provides the ambulance and emergency and non-emergency transport services. However, they actually don't have the appropriate support functions they need from the hospital, so they have no one that can help them do their finances and look at return on investment. So while they have all of these ideas of, can they implement paramedicine, how can they better serve the community and not always just use transportation as a means to get people to the hospital in an emergency situation, but they can't get the support they need to even figure that out or to make sure they have the right staff. So anytime you're trying to do something new, you have to make sure you have the appropriate support functions wrapped around it as well. It's really important to manage that partnership and that relationship as well. Whoever is in charge of this really has to remain positive, be the cheerleader, and fully embrace this from a passionate perspective. New things have to be kind of wild, big-haired, and it has to be okay to try and fail. That's the only way that things are ever going to get refined, and the culture needs to support that. It has to be okay to try new things and them not always work as well. One of the things that often happens, like I mentioned before, you have people that have that historic knowledge of, oh, this will never work, we've tried it before. Or you get people, we don't have the money, we can't pull that off. So it's really important to make sure that the culture supports that. We really need to make sure anytime you're trying to do something new that you're also setting up performance criteria so that they're not just allowed to kind of fly out there, try new things, and not have some structure. So there needs to be accountability and deadlines to when things are going to be implemented, or if there is a trial and error phase, it needs to be clear how long that's going to be and what the end expectation on the other side of that actually is. It's also important to make sure that you're not always in this fighting against the norm situation, that it's okay if this new thing doesn't entirely mesh with the day-to-day operations or what the business used to be. There can be separate ideas and things happening, and that needs to be okay as well.
Hello, Ms. Sigmund.
So I just very quickly, as we wrap up here, I know that it was a lot of information, and we'll be sure to make sure you get the slides. But just to revisit us as a company, our soul mission, coming back to this idea of love and sustainability, it really is, our mission is to advance the life's work of all of you and everyone that we work for. And for us, it's about becoming that extension of your staff. It's being that unbiased third party that can help. It's becoming this advocate for the organization, for the individuals within the organization, for those new ideas, for this culture of love and where emotions and everything are okay. And it's truly helping to advance your mission. There's a long list of things that we do, so again, as we share it, we'll make sure that you have access to them. But again, for us, we have learned that it really comes down to partnerships and relationships and the ability to connect with individuals on this different level. So this love of the mission and love for one another is something that as a company we fully embrace as well. So questions. I know that was a lot of information for all of you.
Yeah, some good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. It was, I know it's a lot. It sort of combined lots of different principles, but hopefully.
Yeah, I was taking a lot of notes.
Good.
And it's all very helpful. It's all things, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer if you have that innovative mindset and the teamwork going for you. But it's getting everybody else on that same mindset.
It's amazing when people can just be honest and talk to one another, the dramatic change it can have. I was having a conversation this afternoon, and it was around one of the clients that we've been working with, and they've had a disenfranchised management team that feels they lack clarity in their job descriptions. They don't feel safe to challenge and question the executive director. And through getting them to embrace this idea that it's safe and it's okay to be honest with one another and care about one another, they've slowly started to become much more open. They're also embracing this idea of completed staff work. So a lot of things that previously would have just been presented as a problem, they're now taking ownership, getting groups involved, and helping to come up with creative solutions for each other. And what was fascinating and just such a positive testimony of how making a couple of changes and being that open and supportive of one another can make a huge difference. This group had a meeting this morning, and they recently expanded their management team about a month ago to include the lower level of supervisors as well. So in addition to just the directors, they brought the lower level on. But again, it's only been within the past month, and that group as a whole has had the opportunity to listen to and clarify the expectations of the executive director. They got to lay out expectations for one another. They've started to embody and walk the talk of this completed staff work principle. And their marketing person had always said, if we can get to the point that we do this spontaneous wave, so like the wave you see at sporting events, just randomly out of the blue in one of our meetings and everyone does it, we'll know that we have solidified and we're a team. And apparently this morning that happened. So within a matter of a short month with the holiday in there, just starting to embrace these principles has let that group gel as a team. So
that's great.
So it's fabulous. It can definitely do wonders. It's a little disheartening at first. I think the idea of relationships and love and all of that, emotions in the workplace, but it really is powerful.
It is. Yes. Need more of it.
Definitely. So any other questions?
Just one question with regards to the actions as they relate to perhaps exemplifying core values. And I do support the concept that those actions are twofold in terms of comparison to what might be stated. But the question I have is with regards to creating the safe zone so that when an action perhaps is not aligned to an expectation, creating the safe zone so that that can be discussed or brought up is often very difficult, even when organizations go through extreme measures to be able to create that kind of environment. And I just wanted to get perhaps your feedback or your comment with regards to that environment or creating that safe zone, and in terms of how one can go about to stress the fact that it is safe to perhaps bring that kind of conversation up.
No, and that's a great question. It is one of the hardest things that we see. And we oftentimes we show up and we try to create a safe environment and get people to talk, and they won't. And in the example I just shared, it really came down to having a core group of the internal staff that was willing to start challenging things and displaying the behavior, and others realizing there were no drastic consequences. They weren't fired. The world didn't come to an end because they challenged it. And it almost has to just be an experiential learning where people realize, nothing bad is going to happen. It really is safe to voice my opinion. So yeah, what we have found is if you can pull out a couple people who can be the advancers and the champions that are comfortable owning that role and asking questions and challenging things and doing those actions that others might normally perceive as not being safe or creating an unsafe environment, and then having it reciprocated, does wonders. Because in the absence of that, we have found that no matter, we can set a number of ground rules, we can all commit that it's okay to do this, but really until people see that you can challenge things or call questions or affectionately criticize, someone's behavior or constructively give feedback and it be okay, it's really hard. I think it's just human behavior.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to attempt that on Monday. So. Yeah.
So I mean, if you could figure out how, figure out the handful of folks that are willing to rally with you and help advance that culture, and like I said, almost be those active voices to do the experiential learning for everybody else. That's really been the number one way we found it has been successful in organizations.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to apply all this knowledge to my meeting on Monday.
Perfect. And if you have specific things, we'll definitely make sure we mail out the presentation. We have everyone's email address, and we'll send our contact information. So if you have something specific you want to kind of talk about or use our term noodling about in preparation for that meeting, I'd be happy to talk to you.
Okay, sounds great.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Please stand by.